All right, we are going to start talking about how to name covalent compounds. To do that, we need to be able to write in ink. I am also going to have a periodic table here. As you can see, I've got one over here to the left. It's got all the elements on it that I need right here, because the first thing we need to remember about covalent compounds, there's a couple of things you need to remember about them, but number one, they are made of all nonmetals. Now, not all compounds that are made of all nonmetals are actually covalent compounds. I believe tomorrow we're going to talk about at least one compound that is an ionic compound, but it's made of all nonmetals. But all covalent compounds are definitely made of nonmetals. They're made of all nonmetals. They involve sharing electrons between atoms. Instead of forming ions, you're actually going to have sharing electrons between atoms. We'll talk more about that. They also tend to have, if you remember from last week, those labs that we did, they have low melting points. Low melting points. Naming covalent compounds is super duper easy. Super duper easy to do. To name them, we use something called the prefix system. We're going to use the prefix system. And the prefix is here, so you had to memorize Roman numerals for ionic compounds. For this one, you're going to have to memorize a few prefixes. So 1 is mono, 2 is di, 3 is tri, 4 is tetra, 5 is penta, 6 is hexa, 7 is octa. Nope, that is wrong. Sorry. 7 is hepta. 8 is octa. 9 is nona. And 10 is deca. You may have heard these before in geometry, for example. You've all heard of a triangle, I'm sure. A pentagon, a hexagon, an octagon, for example. All these prefixes all come from Greek words, and they all mean basically the same thing. To name a compound, for example, let's say we had something like CO2. What we do is we name that first element, and we put a prefix that indicates how many of that element we've got. So remember, it's understood to be a 1 here. So what we are going to do is we are going to call this thing carbon. You say, wait a minute. So rule number one is that never put mono on the first element. And the reason for that is we still want to be able to alphabetize these compounds, and so we don't put 1. We never put mono on the first element. This is the only time you will ever drop a prefix here, right? All right. So we didn't put mono there, but we will put a prefix for that second element. That second element has a 2, so that is di, and O becomes oxygen, but yet again we're going to see that you need to change the last part to end in IDE. So this thing is CO2 is carbon dioxide, and it's that simple. So if I gave you something like SeBr2, SeBr2, that should be 2, sorry about that. The name of that, right, you can pause here if you want to try it. It should be selenium dibromide. Try something a little more difficult, just a tiny bit more difficult. Would be something like S2, S2AS3. So now, because we have 2 of that first, by the way, pause here if you want to try it yourself. But I am going to give you the hint, right? We have 2 of that first element. So that is going to be disulfur, right? Notice it's the first element, so we don't change its ending. And triarsenine. Disulfur triarsenine. And it's that simple. The worst one I can think of is XeF6. F6, which would be xenon hexafluoride. This thing is super duper unstable. Only exists for a few seconds. Not even a few seconds. Cool? Easy enough. I'll see you guys tomorrow.